this video, section 6.1, we're going to be talking about percents and decimals. This is probably somewhat reviewed for you before, but we're just going to go through it. A percent is a ratio that is expressed generally as a fraction of 100. So you've seen stuff like this before. 53%, the way we can write that as a fraction is just basically 53 out of 100. That's all this really is. We typically don't see it written like this. We usually see it more written as decimals, but we'll talk about that in a second. Here's another example. 8% can be just simply written as 8 out of 100. But as I said before, we don't normally see fractions quite like this when it deals with percents. What we normally see is dealing with decimals. It makes our life a little bit easier, believe it or not. And if I had to give you a percent and I need you to change it to a decimal, we simply remove the percent symbol and divide by 100. Or we can just move the decimal two places. So I'm going to show you both ways. So I have 53% here. I'm basically just going to get rid of the percent symbol, and I'm going to say 53 divided by 100. And when I work that out, and I can do it by hand if I want to, or I can do it by calculator, I find out that it's 0.53. The easiest way, and this is the way that I do it most of the time, it's just simpler to remember, is I do this. I get rid of my percent symbol, and wherever the decimal place is, in this case it's here, I'm just going to move it two places to the left. 1, 2. And when I do, that actually would get my decimal right here. So the new decimal would be 0.53. This is the easiest method, is just moving your decimal to the left. Now, the next one is getting decimals to percent. So it's really the reverse process. If I give you a decimal, this time multiply it by 100 and then add the percent. And that's pretty simple. So you can do it by calculator, you can do it by hand, but 0.08 times 100 is 8, add the percent sign. Or I can use the same concept, but in reverse, and I'm going to reverse the direction that I moved my decimal. Whereas before I moved it to the left, now I'm going to move it to the right, and I'm going to move it 2 places. And when I do, that gives me 8, and the decimal would be here, and then I just add my percent sign. I'm done. One way that I like to remember it is mostly by moving the decimals. And I kind of like to set up a column. I have a D and P. Notice that it is really important that you understand the position of where this is. So D represents decimal, P represents percent. But when I start my little columns here, notice that D becomes before P, because think of it this way, it's alphabetically speaking, D is first and P is last. So that's the way I like to set my column up. And it works out beautifully mathematically. So here I have the number 63%. And I want to change this. I know it's a percent, so I'm going to put it over here in my percent column. All right, so 63%. I need to change it to a decimal, so I'm going to be changing it and moving it that direction into the decimal column. When I do, that's actually telling me to move my decimal in that same direction. And what my decimal now becomes is 0.63. This one, I actually have a decimal. I don't have a percent sign, so I'm going to plug that in my decimal column. And I need to change it to a percent. And so because I'm moving to the right, I'm going to move my decimal to the right, and I get 675%. Now, you might be freaking out and say, Mr. Lewis, that's not a thing. Actually, yes, it is. We can get larger percents than 100. So if you happen to have that, doesn't mean you're wrong. Ask yourself, did you follow procedure? Did you move your decimal in the correct way? In this case, I did. Lastly, I got 1.2%, so I'm going to write that in my little column here. And since I know I'm trying to go to a decimal, I'm going in that direction, so I need to move 1 and 2. Always 2. So what happens? I move 2 places, so what goes here in this blank spot? A 0. And when I do, I get 0.012. And you're thinking, that doesn't look right either, but it is. I moved 2 spaces. And since I had a space that didn't have a number in there, I put the number 0. And that's pretty much it for this lesson, guys. That's really all we're doing, is we are changing percents and turning into decimals, and then vice versa. So why don't you try these next problems on your own and come back and see how you did. All right, so for these problems, here are your answers. You can pause the video and check them if you like. And as always, you know how to find me. Let's go to the next one here. 9, 10, and 11. It says, write the percent as a fraction in simplest form and as a decimal. So we're going to show you a couple of ways of doing this. First off, remember how I said earlier, and we kind of did it this way, is that we can simply write that percentage as a fraction, as out of 100? That's really all we're going to do right now. So I can really state that this one is really easy. I could say that that's 48 out of 100. And then I can reduce by using my fraction skills. I know that I can simplify that at least by 2. That would give me 24 out of 50. I could probably go a little bit farther, and I can get 12 out of 25. I think that's it. I want to double check myself on the calculator, and I will show you how to use the calculator in a minute. And I believe we can't do anything else. That's it. That's as far as I can reduce that fraction. And now it's telling me to not only write it as a fraction in simplest form, but as a decimal. And well, that was easy. We can just move our decimal places, and that would be 0.48. All right. Now, how could I have done that with a calculator? Well, that's easy. That's easy. So here's my calculator. The easiest thing for me to do is to change this percent into a decimal, which we already did. I'm going to go 0.48 in my calculator. Done. And recall how we can change a decimal into a fraction by using this button right here. Second, PRB. And that gives me this little symbol, FD. It's going to change this fraction to a decimal and backwards. Hit the enter key, and I get 12 out of 25. And that's it. All right, so this next one, we can do the same thing. Now, the hard part about this is when I write it, it's 15.5 out of 100 when I write it as a fraction. So we've got some problems here. How do we go about doing this? Well, I don't really like this as a fraction with a decimal in there. So what do I do? The best thing to do is actually to try to convert and get rid of this decimal. And the best way I can do that is multiplying this whole thing by 2. And it changes the problem to be 31 out of 200. All right. I can't really divide anything out of these numbers at the same time without keeping a decimal in there. It's not possible. However, I can multiply it by a number, and I can get rid of this decimal and turn it into a whole number. When I did, I get 31 out of 200. And I'm looking at it, I don't think I can reduce that. I think that's as far as my simplest form as I possibly can. But let's find out. Let's go ahead and change this thing to a decimal, and we know by moving it to the left, it would be 0.155. So let's plug that in our calculator, 0.155. I'm going to change that into a fraction, and I'm going to hit enter, and 31 out of 200. I was right. Okay, I wasn't sure, to be honest with you. I had to double check myself. And then the same thing here. I really don't like this one already because I have 0.95. I'm not even going to worry about trying to do this by saying 84.95 out of 100. That's my fraction, but this is not a good fraction. So I'm going to actually use my calculator this time to help me. I'm going to write this in decimal form, and I'm going to get 0.8495. So I'm going to put that in there, 0.8495. And this time I'm going to go second of PRB, change it to a fraction, and I get, this one's giving me a problem. So, calculator won't work. So what do I do on this particular thing? Well, let's see. Now we have to go back to a skill that's from a long, long time ago in a land far, far away that I believe was called Chapter 1. And I have the number 0.8495. Well, I need to look at this last digit. This last digit, this would be the 10th, the 100th, the thousandth. This is the 10,000ths. So I can rewrite this fraction as 8495 over 10,000. All right. So now I need to be able to simplify this number as a fraction. I'm wondering if I can plug that into my calculator this time. So 8495 divide by 10,000. It gives me that same number, but let's see if it will give me a fraction this time. Nope, still won't do it. The calculator's not being very nice to me right now. But I do know that I can simplify both of these by 5. So 8495, when we reduce that, I'm going to get 1699. And then I'm going to do 10,000, and I'm going to divide that by 5, and that will give me my denominator, and it gives me 2,000. So can I do anything else with this? Well, let's find out. 1699 divided by 2,000. Does that give me? It gives me that. And again, we know that it's not going to reduce it. In all truth and honesty, I don't think I could reduce this anymore. This is as far as I can take it. So what did we learn from this? One, we can do really simple ones in our head, where we can just change it to a fraction pretty drastic easily. And we also learned that we can use our calculator. But here's what we also learned. Sometimes the calculator doesn't know everything. In this particular case, it would not change it to a fraction for us for I don't know what reason. I am curious to see if my other calculator will, and we'll try that in a second. But what happens when we do that? Well, when we rewrote this as a decimal, we were able to rewrite it as a fraction, and we saw that it can be simplified by factoring out a 5. And that was what we were able to do manually. But for some reason, this calculator couldn't do it. Let's just see if this calculator can do it, just out of curiosity. So 0.8495, I'm going to try it out with my math. And yep, this one could handle it. So apparently you just need to be aware that some calculators can do it, some calculators can't. And the reason being is that not all calculators are made the same. And so here's where I always say, be smarter than your calculator and don't rely on them as much as we try to. All right, anyway, enough preaching on that. We're just about done with this video. This one's pretty straightforward. It says people with severe hearing loss were given a sentence and a word recognition test 6 months after they got implants in their ears. The patient scored an average of 82% on the test. Write this percent as a decimal. Well, that's easy. Basically, we're going to move our decimal to the left, and I get 0.82, and I'm done. And that's it for this video, guys. It was pretty easy. I have to admit, these actually stumped me. I wasn't expecting them to give me problems with the calculator, but I'm glad that they did to kind of prove that point, that calculators are not always the solve-all, be-all situation. But that's it for this, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.